I have a question. Is there a general and neutral view of what is right and what is wrong? What about a basic and neutral understanding of what constitutes that you know something? And is there a scientific answer as to what reality is that everyone basically agrees on? I'd like to give an example of how everyone is assuming a certain view of these three categories mentioned. Consider this scenario. Your friend Billy says to you, "You should tolerate other viewpoints and perspectives, because to do so is to be kind to others, and we all know that kindness is good for this world, and anyway, it's arrogant to say there is only one right way." In this scenario, your friend Billy asserts that we should tolerate different viewpoints because kindness is beneficial. Claiming there is only one way is arrogant. I want you to notice Billy's statement demonstrates two things: his world and life view, a term which we'll define in a moment, and a logical problem. Despite his claim that it's arrogant to assert there is just one way, Billy is actually, in terms of his own criterion, either reducing his entire statement to mere opinion, in which case he is being perfectly futile, or contradicting himself by implying that it's arrogant to assume any other way than his own perspective. So what am I getting at? There are two key points. Everyone is always engaged in philosophy, which is, as John Frame put it, the disciplined attempt to articulate and defend a worldview. What we saw with Billy was an application of his worldview, however inconsistent it was. It nonetheless presented for us a view of reality, truth, and what men ought to do. Which leads me to my second key point. A neutral position on these matters is impossible. To illustrate this, imagine Billy again and now Johnny presenting their hand-drawn maps of a town they live in. Billy confidently hands you a map and claims that by following it, you'll know how to get everywhere. Upon examining the map, you immediately notice that it bears no resemblance to the experience of the town. The names are similar, but the directions provided are nonsensical, suggesting you swim across the Nile River when you're actually in Kansas. When confronted, Billy justifies his map by reminding you that he is a tolerant feller, and so he drew it to demonstrate that placing things within just one boundary improperly limits them. He tells you, "The compass of my map is to follow your heart. And look, I'll use the map right now and we'll walk together to the barbershop." But you reply, "Billy, there is no way you are traveling in terms of this map. It cannot account for the fact that you know where the barbershop is, because when I tried to find it earlier by using your map, I wound up 3 towns over at a feed store." Just then, Johnny tunes in and says, "I've got the solution to your directional dilemma." And he promptly presents you his map. You open it, and it simply says, "Town." There are no specific streets, no stores marked. According to Johnny, there are no real individual distinctions to be made, only the one. So despite living in the same town, visiting the same stores, both Billy and Johnny offer different maps with conflicting ways of navigating and even differing interpretations of what it means to get somewhere. Nonetheless, they do have this in common. If what they said were true about their town, they could not know where anything was. They must be using someone else's map. To give a real-life example, some claim that reality is ultimately impersonal and without a grand rationale, and yet in the same breath they will attempt to reason and demonstrate the rationality of this belief. Well, either this person's account of reality is not true, or his claims to be reasoning with you are not true, or maybe both are not true. But in any case, he cannot be a non-reasoning reasoner. So worldviews are biased, and they are not all created equal. And as we saw, for a worldview to be coherent, it cannot be like Billy's map or the impersonalist just mentioned, because such would destroy the necessary requirements for making sense of basic things. And thus to maintain such a worldview would reduce every belief you hold to mere arbitrary, unjustified opinion, because there would be no basis within that framework or map to anchor objectivity. Thus, to put all of my cards on the table at once here, my aim in doing these videos is that I wish to demonstrate by use of illustrations provided simply by men in the history of philosophy who reasoned on the basis of themselves, that the only available option to us that does not reduce to pure skepticism is the world and life view offered by Christian theism, namely, reasoning in terms of the triune God under the lordship of Jesus Christ. So, we all have bias, and we all have maps. Thus the question is, whose biased map do you want? I suspect you don't want Billy's. If so, we may be getting somewhere. In the event that there is a holdout listening who is still trying to think of a way to maintain a rationally neutral position, allow me to give a precursor to our study by asking this question. What reason and rationality are you thinking about? Do you want to use Plato's archetypal forms as a standard for objectivity and reason? Well, you'll have to deal with his mysticism. Do you want Zeno's and Aurelius's impersonal fate that somehow guides reality as reason? We've discussed already the contradiction of reasoning in an impersonal universe. What about Descartes' clear and distinct ideas as the basis for what is reasonable? You will have then only a reality that can prove its own thoughts. What about Hume's famous wrecking ball? That anything reasonable to believe is what you experience sensibly. You'll be forced to say with him, I have no basis to believe that the sun will rise tomorrow. But what about Wilhelm Hegel's dialectic? Does that suit your fancy? If so, you'll have to account for how his dialectic is not the ultimate explanation while attempting to explain reality ultimately. If that doesn't work for you, maybe the existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre's idea of rational will be of better taste. Namely, the rational and reasonable is what you make it to be. If this is your guy, then opinions are ultimate. But then again, they're not, because I have a different one. In the final analysis, there are only two options left to us, really. The history of philosophy shows that you either choose a worldview with man as the final reference point, which annihilates rationality of experience on the altar of human autonomy, or you submit yourself to the one who can account for objective moral values, knowledge, and coherency in experience, the Lord Jesus Christ, in whom are all the riches of wisdom and knowledge. So, choose your bias, but be prepared to deal with the consequences. I hope you'll join me.